and look at faith that can move a mountain. I don't know about you on tonight, but how many of us need something from God that's going to require faith? That's where we're at on tonight. Looking at something that we need faith. Now, throughout the history of God's people, from Genesis all the way to Revelation, there has been a battle between faith and failure. I'll be the first one to tell you, how many of us in here has failed at something? We failed at something. And what happens when we fail? It causes us to then have a lack of faith. We tend to start doubting ourselves. Well, we can look at the Israelites when they were scared at the sight of the Canaanite giants. Y'all remember that? Or when Peter starts sinking, he's walking on water, he's walking in faith, and then bam, he looks down and he sees this sea, and guess what happens? He starts to sink. All things that causes him to have a lack of faith. And in Matthew 17, our chapter on tonight, we find Jesus. What is Jesus doing? He is confronting his disciples' spiritual deficiency. Let the church say spiritual deficiency. Okay? Because they previously failed to cast out a demon. Okay? That's Bible. Now, the issue in the text is not their lack of effort, because they put forth all the effort, but it's their lack of faith. So, in Matthew 17 and 20, we find one of Jesus' most profound teachings on faith. And he compares faith to this itty-bitty, teeny-weeny mustard seed. And so when he's teaching us about the mustard seed, he's emphasizing that even a small piece that's this big, almost microscopic, but if it's genuine and you trust, then God can still produce supernatural results. I'm going to say that again because somebody needs to hear that. Somebody's dealing with something on tonight. I'm trying not to preach. I know it's not Sunday, but somebody's dealing with something, and I'm here to tell you that if you just have this little bitty, itty-bitty, teeny-weeny little bit of genuine faith, God can produce supernatural results. It's a healing waiting on that size of faith. Now, here's what I want us to look at, because I want us to not only be emotional learners, but I want us to be intellectual. Say intellectual. We're going to look at the information in the text. We're going to look at the inspiration in the text. And then we're going to look at the application of the text. How can we apply it to our lives? That's Bible study, okay? So let's talk about, first, let's talk about the historical context. The historical context. When you're studying, when you're reading the Bible, make sure you look at the historical part of the Bible, okay? Too often, we hear scriptures. We hear people using scriptures, and listen, they sound good, and they're even genuine, but sometimes they're teaching wrong because they haven't fully dissected the scripture. So that's what I want us to do on tonight. The historical context, okay? Let's look at the historical context. The disciples at this moment, they're in a spiritual crisis. Matthew 17, it occurs after the moment of transfiguration, okay? This happens after heaven opened up. This is my beloved son, whom I'm well pleased, okay? After the moment of transfiguration, where Peter, James, and John, they witnessed Christ's divine glory, okay? It was God putting his hand on them and proving, this is mine, all right? So, meanwhile, while that's happening, the disciples were engaged in another spiritual matter, and they end up failing, all right? And they fail to heal this demon-possessed boy, all right? He's possessed. They tried. They did everything they could. Watch this. They had actually healed before. They had miracles before. But this appointed time, they couldn't do it. They failed, all right? So that's the historical context. That's where we are in the Bible. That's the timeline. Then, here it is. Let's look at the conflict, okay? The father of the possessed boy, he approaches Jesus. He comes up to Jesus. He says, they couldn't do it. I need you to do it, all right? And he pleads for help after the disciples failed, all right? You can find this in verse 14 through 16. Jesus, he expresses his frustration. Jesus gets mad. Jesus, he turns and he says, "O faithless and perverse generation." O faithless and perverse generation. I had to ask some questions. I want to know, hey, Jesus, why you couldn't just say faithless? Why'd you have to say perverse? And Jesus, why couldn't you just say, oh, faithless disciples? Why'd you have to say faithless generations? I don't know if y'all ask a question like that. I had to ask Jesus. I had to ask the Bible that question, okay? And so Jesus, I can't wait to get to heaven to meet him. He responded to me, and he showed me that that statement, it was showing that the issue was not just with the disciples, but Jesus had an issue with an entire generation that lacked faith. That's what was going on. That's why he said, you lack faith and pervert generation, okay? It's a rebuke that would suggest faithlessness had become a common condition. Let me say that again. Faithlessness had become a common condition. Let me prove it to you. Faith had become so common, faithlessness had become so common that even the people that were closest to Jesus, that saw the miracles, that were with him when he turned water into wine, that when he healed people, when he had them walk, all of that, they were still in unbelief. So he saw what was going on. And so he gave them the subtle rebuke. And then we also have to understand and we have to see that in this historical context, that's the conflict. But then what else do we see in the text? We see, let's talk about miracles. The Jewish expectation during this time of faith in miracles. In first century Judaism, miracles, they were expected to come from priests and rabbis and prophets, but they were also dependent on the spiritual authority of the leader. What does that mean? They knew who could heal and who couldn't. So they knew who had the authority to cast out a demon. So that's why when the dad saw that the disciples couldn't do it, he went straight to Jesus. And what I'm trying to say, and what I'm trying to get